So we talked a little bit about the fact that we've got OCM, Mark mentioned it, and we've got ACOs and alternative payment models. And Dana, maybe you'll start us off on this, but how pervasive are they within the world of IDNs? Is the assumption that every hospital is involved in some kind of alternative payment model? I mean, is it, it started as a pilot program. It was very surprising with OCM that I think many thought it would be a dozen practices that would be participating, and then it turns out to be 196, and and what represents could be 50% of Medicare beneficiaries with cancer are involved in an OCM. But that's not been necessarily the case within the hospitals. How pervasive are these different CMMI kind of innovation models across hospitals? And is it really still in that very much pilot? And how well are they going to be able to adapt if that becomes kind of the way of the road?
Yeah, I think it depends on the model, to be honest. And from the ACO perspective, there are many. Many are participating. From the OCM perspective, not that many. I think Banner, Cleveland Clinic, just a handful, and not very many at all. And that, I think, is on the OCM side a big to be determined with the model in and of itself. There are a lot of kinks to be worked out in the oncology care model, and they're working hard to do that. The one thing I will tell you, in that even a lot of these practices will tell you, is that it is certainly changing the way that they care for patients, which is a good thing. But from the other perspective, from the financial perspective, there's a whole heck of a lot to be worked out there. But many of them really tout the services and the well-rounded care for these patients at this point.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've learned, even though I agree with what you said, so some of the IDNs that are participating, and the one that sticks out in my head is Yale and what Karen Adelson has done. IDNs have resources that practices do not. So what they did at Yale was they developed an oncology urgent care program. It's owned by the hospital. They made the business case for it. It supported the OCM effort, and it was at least financially acceptable to the hospital system. Community oncology practices do not have access to that kind of capital, or not, just don't even make it a money issue. They don't have access to those kind of resources, those kind of opportunities. I remember when I was practicing.
Well, they had to build it, though. They had to build a lot of that, which was really expensive.
No, they did, but they could. That's my point. When I was in practice, this is before the OCM, we had a contract with our largest commercial payer. And I thought it would be really great if we could partner with an urgent care center so that in the evening hours, if I had a patient who had nausea or vomiting, who had a fever and needed their blood counts checked, they could go to the urgent care center. It was literally in the same office complex we were located. I could not find a mechanism to have them execute a contract. They saw my vision. It didn't make business sense for them to do that. Why? Urgent care centers are volume businesses. Having somebody there for hydration for 2 hours, they don't get paid for that. They don't have access to lab 24 hours a day, necessarily. They might, but they don't necessarily. So they couldn't do a chest x-ray. So the issue is that an IDN opens avenues for a practice to start thinking about, how do I optimally manage this cancer patient? It's just something you can't do when you're a freestanding community oncology practice, unless you're really, really big. TOPA could do it, but most cancer practices can't.
Well, it gets back to a lot of what we've been talking about, whether it was the mergers and acquisitions and what that brings to the table, or the IDNs. It's the coordination of care component, which really is the driver of that.
And so it's funny because I've been working with some practices on their OCM reconciliation data, and we found some interesting things about the reasons for hospitalizations in patients with common malignancies. And man, if you got COPD, you're in trouble in the OCM. So I have said to the practices, you need to have these patients co-managed by a pulmonologist. I'm just saying, right? If I know that a third of your hospitalizations are for COPD or pneumonia, there's a lesson there. The lesson is you're not doing a good job with those people with those problems, and there may be a path to resolve that. And in an IDN, where you're all under the same roof, it becomes easy. I said when I was in practice, trying to find a psychiatrist to see a patient of mine was like, it's impossible. But if you're in an IDN, it's quite different. It's quite different.
No, I mean, I think in practice, often you need to have friends. It was a
Oh,
friends
yeah.
network, right? You'd have to find that psychiatrist who would be your buddy,
Yeah.
who you knew you could call and ask the favor, because it was always a favor. It was never routine. It was never I could just you can't have an emergency, and for a steroid psychosis, and it's going to be managed in 3 months.